Well, we are going to record the meeting and it will be posted. And for those who just gave up and weren't able to get on, then we'll send out the recording right away as soon as it's available. But let me reintroduce Chris Benda. Chris is known as the Illinois Botanizer, and you'll understand why, because he goes all over the state as a researcher for Southern Illinois University, where he coordinates the Plants of Concern Southern Illinois program. He also teaches the flora of Southern Illinois, and he does field work at the Morton Arboretum in Camp Onondaga. And he has research appointments with the University of Illinois and Argonne National Laboratory. But mostly he is known through his website, the Illinois Botanizer, on keeping track of our wonderful native flora. And he's probably seen more rare and endangered plants in Illinois than anybody else I know. Last month, we heard a lot of information about our favorite spring wildflowers and some of the lore and botanical uses of them. Chris is going to talk more about the ecology and their adaptations, the myriad adaptations that they have in order to survive and reproduce. So with that, I'm going to just turn it over to Chris Benda.
Okay, thank you, Jerry and Janet, for the invitation to speak to the Rock Valley Wild Ones chapter about the spring ephemeral wildflowers. So again, my name is Chris Benda, and I work at Southern Illinois University, coordinating the Plants of Concern program, which is a rare plant monitoring program where we utilize the help of volunteers to help do the monitoring. And it's a partnership between SIU and the Chicago Botanic Garden. I was actually out all day today. I've been out all day this week and last week looking for rare plants. I found 2 new occurrences of 2 different state endangered plants today. So that was exciting. Also, as Jerry mentioned, you can find me online as Illinois Botanizer, particularly post to my YouTube or my Facebook page, but I have some YouTube videos that I think people would enjoy. So check me out on social media. Direct you to my website where I have a lot of wildflower photos posted, and you can find interesting information, mostly photos for those. For many plants, I think I have 1,100 entries now there in the database, so a lot of plants. And then at the Morton Arboretum, I teach I set up a class called Botanical Names Demystified that I think some people may be interested in knowing about. It's on demand and it's entirely online, so I don't interact with you during the course, but it goes through reasons why botanical names are used and what they mean and all sorts of other interesting information. So look that up if you're interested. And I'd like to briefly have a land acknowledgement before I get started that acknowledges the fact that there were other people living here before Europeans expanded onto the continent, and we really have them to thank for a lot of the maintenance of the natural communities that were present here when Europeans arrived. Of course, it's a complicated subject. Things have changed drastically since then, and it's not a pleasant story, but I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that this continent has changed so much. Okay, so Illinois has a lot of diversity. I think 3,600 species of native and non-native plants. I think it's about 2,400 or so are the native species in the state. If you're going to be doing your spring wildflower viewing and you want to know about resources, here are my favorite ones. So Don Kurz is a pretty, picture book where you flip through the color sections and find the photo that matches what you're looking at. I like Newcomb's Wildflower Guide a little bit better because you can actually, it has more drawings and you can determine what a plant might be when it's not blooming, which is really useful. Although in the springtime, most plants, that are occurring are in bloom. Also, then two new resources here, the Wildflowers of Indiana Dunes National Park, which is a little bit, I guess, from Rockford, but you know, it shares a lot of the same flora as Northern Illinois. And then Wildflowers of the Midwest, a much more regional guide. I contributed a number of photos to that book, and those two are relatively new. In the last year, they've been released and published. So check all those resources out. But the idea with the spring ephemeral wildflowers is they have they've adapted, have a strategy for growth that is different than most other plants in that these are wildflowers, plants that occur in rich areas that have a lot of organic matter, a lot of nutrients, moisture. It's a very productive environment. And often because of that productive environment, it grows trees very well. And so the canopy is so continuous and full that during leaf out season, the growing season, not very much light is getting to the forest floor for plants to photosynthesize and grow. So the strategy with the spring ephemeral wildflowers is to grow quickly in the spring, photosynthesize and reproduce before the canopy closes. And that's what makes them ephemeral. They're doing all of their eating, right? They're photosynthesizing for about a few weeks' time in March, April time period. I do want to make the distinction that a true spring ephemeral wildflower or spring ephemeral, I should say, a true spring ephemeral is a plant that will grow and flower and photosynthesize and then wither away quickly, like in a matter of weeks. So some of these in the presentation are true spring ephemerals, but other ones actually persist throughout the growing season as leaves and continue to photosynthesize. Even though their flowers are short-lived and they do bloom in the spring, if the leaves persist throughout the growing season, then they're not technically an ephemeral because they haven't withered away. So a lot of the plants that bloom in the spring actually persist through the summer. These are in somewhat of a chronological order, starting with the earliest bloomers, which of course is the harbinger of spring, Erigenia bulbosa. And you can see them represented here, the Illinois Native Plant Society. The journal is called Erigenia, and our newsletter, of which I am the current editor, is called The Harbinger. So this is kind of the namesake for Illinois Native Plant Society. And you can see there with my car key next to the small little plants, how dainty and tiny they really are. And this is kind of a conservative plant. So I'm going to use that word conservative throughout the slideshow. And that means conservative plants are ones that are found in pristine, intact, relatively stable environments versus plants that aren't very conservative. I consider weeds that are, very widespread in the environment in disturbed and degraded areas. So the harbinger Erigenia, it's a conservative species. It's in the carrot family. And
Chris,
it's often called, yes.
So we don't see this in Northern Illinois much. How far is the range of this?
It's throughout Illinois. It's not as common in the northern part of the state, but it's a wildflower that does occur throughout the state. It's not continuous throughout the state, but a lot of counties statewide. So it's called salt and pepper because it has the white petals and the purple stamens that kind of contrast. Here's another picture that shows that. And the flowers are produced first, and the leaves actually come a little later. And then when they're done flowering, you can actually see clumps of leaves like in the photo on the right. That helps you identify it. I actually found some today, although it's withering quickly. There is actually a little rust. If you find some that have little yellow injury sort of looking scaly parts, then that's a rust that is specific on harbinger of spring. So that's commonly encountered. I do have a lot of slides, so I'm going to kind of go quickly. Skunk cabbage is another early wildflower. I always try to catch it at the Castle Rock State Park there in the George Fell Nature Preserve. This is in the arum family. So the arums have the spathe and spadix. The spadix is in the middle. That's where the flowers are produced. And the spathe is kind of the shroud that surrounds the flowers. And this one actually can use, through a process called thermogenesis, can actually heat up the surrounding soil and melt the snow around the skunk cabbage flower so that they can emerge and flower. And of course, they are attracting carrion feeders, flies and beetles and things that are attracted to carrion, and they often have a foul odor, hence the name, the skunk cabbage, attracting those insects that are going after rotting flesh. Oh, I should mention that the skunk cabbage often will emerge from underground and be poking up out of the ground during the winter, the whole winter time. I made the mistake once of going to a seep and saw the flowers poking out of the ground and thought, oh, they're starting, it seems early, they're starting to bloom, but they'll actually sit like that throughout the winter. And then when they're really ready to flower, then of course they're going to fully emerge, which is typically in early April in the Rockford area. But I put this in there. This blooms early April as well. It's a little bit later than the skunk cabbage, but they often grow together in the same kind of community. It's called a calcareous seep. So the marsh marigold grows in these areas that are very wet, where the groundwater is seeping up to the surface, and the groundwater has been percolating through limestone before it reaches the surface. So limestone is calcium carbonate. It's filled with calcium, and calcium makes the water basic or alkaline on the pH scale. And so some plants favor that particular pH level, like marsh marigold, and they grow in these calcareous areas. Beautiful wildflower in the buttercup family, the Ranunculaceae. Now, another early one, a shrub. I am going to end the presentation with shrubs, but I put this one here at the beginning just because it's such an early bloomer. Leatherwood. This is also statewide, but not very common. I've mapped all the populations that I know of in Southern Illinois, and I think there's maybe 8 or so. But it grows, around Starved Rock, Matheson. It's in Cook County, so it's and over like Vermilion County, Forest Glen. So it's really throughout the state, but pretty rare still generally. But the little yellow flowers are produced in late March. This where I'm at, so far south. I'm in Jackson County, and they're really I think pretty, even though they're somewhat inconspicuous. The twigs are very flexible. That's why they call it leatherwood. I joke and say that you can tie your shoes with a twig of leatherwood. You can literally wrap it around in several circles and figure eights, and it will not break. It's very pliable. So that makes it a neat one. And then another, of course, really early wildflower we have is Spring Beauty. And the interesting thing about this is that it's one of the first spring ephemerals to start blooming, but really one of the last ones to stop. So, there's different individuals that are blooming throughout the season, but this wildflower, this species, can be blooming in March and it can be blooming still in May. It has a long bloom period. So that's interesting. You can see that it has 2 linear leaves that grow with each flower. But another thing that's interesting about it, and this is in the purslane family, I believe, but the Portulacaceae. Sometimes they're pretty white, and other times they're quite pink, and it's kind of streaked with pink. So if anybody follows the In Defense of Plants website, you should. Great material there. The author did his PhD at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and he has a blog post about Spring Beauty, and he mentions that the more pure white flowered ones have chemicals that deter herbivory, depredation. And then the pink ones, of course, are more easily seen by bees and other pollinators. So it's all about the genetics, and are the genetics going to favor, survival, not getting eaten, or survival in the sense of being able to more effectively reproduce. So that's why you see such variation in colors for Spring Beauty. Another early one up there, we don't have this in Southern Illinois. I took this picture at Harlem Hills last year on April 9th. The Pasque flower. That was my first time seeing this in Illinois. And it grows in gravel prairies. And very early, around Easter time, as the name Pasque flower mentions, it does have some different taxonomy. I learned it as Anemone patens. I think Pulsatilla is another name, more accurate name, but it is another buttercup in the Ranunculaceae. It grows really early in the springtime and really only high quality sites. And I was hearing from others through Facebook discussions that it seems like the clumps like in the picture here are not very commonly encountered now, that often they're more solitary and fewer plants are seen, and they're trying to figure out why that may be. And there's a number of ideas that were proposed, but in any event, it is a beautiful early spring wildflower. just as bloodroot is. Bloodroot is a poppy in the poppy family. Sanguinaria canadensis refers to the blood in the root, which is the orange sap. It's like a dark orange colored sap. The flowers here are very fleeting. They bloom for like a day, it seems. So to get a nice flowers that are full and open, you really have to time it just right. And this far south where I'm at, they're long done blooming. Really, the end of March was the third week in March is really when I was seeing them. But they have these really neat looking leaves, and these leaves do persist throughout the growing season. And you can see in the middle of the leaf there's a little stalk with the little capsule at the end. That's the fruit where the flower was produced, turns into fruit. And what's really cool about bloodroot and some other spring ephemerals is that they have seeds that are covered in elaiosomes. The elaisome is the white part surrounding the seed, which is that kind of yellow creamish color. And the elaisome is nutrient-rich fatty tissue that ants crave. So I call it ant bacon because the ants actually carry the seeds to their lair where they eat the elaisome, and then they pitch the seeds. They're too hard for an ant to eat. And so they basically are dispersing them. This plant is dispersed by ants, and the fancy term for that is myrmecochory. So ants will do this for a number of things: trout lily, Dutchman's breeches, even some sedges like Carex umbellata that have the fruits at the base of the plant. The ants will carry them off in the springtime and consume them. So that's super cool. And then liverleaf, another really early one. And these, I just love hepaticas. They're so beautiful. This one is really quite a blue, purplish color. Most often, I would say they're white, sometimes pink, and then rarer, the darker colors. But this is another buttercup in the Ranunculaceae, and it's called liverleaf because the leaves turn a brown liver color in the wintertime, in the dormant season, and then they have 3 lobes to them. So it's the whole doctrine of signatures idea where God marked plants with his signature that indicated how they were to be used as medicine. So if something was shaped like a liver, it should be used for liver ailments. Of course, the Ranunculaceae is a toxic family. And toxicity can sometimes be medicinal, but generally we avoid toxic plants. But also, these persist throughout the year as well. And the foliage, I think, is quite attractive. I actually took this picture not too far from Rockford at Franklin Creek Conservation Area. And so you can see the shape of the leaves and the modeling. Pardon me, my allergies have been just really bad today. There's a lot of oaks are flowering right now. But this is another little cutie that I just adore, the wedge-leaved whitlow grass, Draba cuneifolia. They had a new name now. They call it tomostoma. In any event, it is not a grass. It is a mustard in the Brassicaceae. It is an annual. You can see in my hand, the basal leaves have little notches or teeth, kind of. That's the distinction for this species. It has a hairy stem and hairy fruits that distinguish it from the more common Draba reptans. But this only grows in Monroe County, Illinois, which is where Foltz Hill Prairie is. In fact, Foltz Hill Prairie has a lot of it. But I did find a little bit in Randolph, just over the county line. So only 2 counties for this. It is a state endangered species, although it's common as dirt in Missouri, right across the river. But in Illinois, just 2 counties. Another early bloomer that I like is garden vervain. It's also called rose verbena, Glandularia canadensis. I don't encounter this in the wild that often in Illinois, in high quality prairies, really dry prairies, or limestone glades. But it is widely available in the nursery trade, and a lot of people have planted it in their landscaping or home garden. I just saw some today in front of someone's house. So it's very popular, and it should be. It's a beautiful native plant. So consider that one for something that you could incorporate in your home landscaping. You can see the close-up view there. Where I typically see this far south is just at Luru Pine Hills. Okay. So this is toothwort, another really early bloomer, another mustard. Mustards have 4 petals typically. This is a white flowered mustard. Cut leaf toothwort. It used to be Dentaria laciniata. People knew that name, I'm sure, but now it's classified with the Cardamines, Cardamine concatenata. Early bloomer. And another early bloomer is the Dutchman's breeches, Dicentra cucularia. And I joke that there's a lot of naked Dutchmen running around this time of year with their breeches hanging out to dry from the laundry. In fact, sometimes they even come of a little pink color. And I joke and say, well, this Dutchman apparently threw his red handkerchief in with his whitey tighties and got them. They came out pink there. So they're hanging out to dry on the laundry line. But it also, this has quite attractive foliage too, but this is a true spring ephemeral. Here in Southern Illinois, these are done blooming. The leaves are withering quickly. So this plant only really is visible for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. But it is closely related to squirrel corn, Dicentra canadensis. And the squirrel corn flowers, instead of having the spreading petals, they kind of curve in and have a little heart shape. And these are similar to bleeding hearts. Bleeding heart is in the Dicentra genus. Bleeding hearts are not native to Illinois, but they are native in North America, and a lot of people have them in their garden. So this is our native version, the white flowered ones, the squirrel corn. Now here's chickweed. There are lots of chickweeds. Some of the chickweeds are in the genus Stellaria. More of them are in the genus Cerastium. But this is the larger one called the great chickweed, and it's very hairy, hence the name pubera. It does occur in the Cook County region, but it's a state endangered plant. I found 2 new county records last year in Jackson and Johnson counties. But if you look at the petals, you can see it looks like there's 10 petals. There's actually 5, and they're very deeply cleft. And in between the petals are little green appendages called sepals. And you can see that the sepals are shorter than the petals. So that's a big clue because most of the chickweeds have petals that are shorter than the sepals. In this case, it's the sepals that are shorter than the petals. A very beautiful one. And then I saw these today. Oh, these are not, this is like Pope County is the place to see dwarf crested iris. So I know this one doesn't occur in the Rockford region, but a lot of people, again, have it in their garden. It's easy to obtain in the nursery trade, and it's so gorgeous. It's a short little iris, Iris cristata. So I found a roadside population in Polk County where there's a lot of them, but they're not commonly encountered in Illinois. So that's a really cool one. But one that is up in the northern part of the state is the twin leaf, Jeffersonia diphylla. Jeffersonia is named after Thomas Jefferson. Diphylla, of course, for 2 leaves, you can see called twin leaf. And if you look at the picture on the right, it looks like butterfly wings. Those are the 2 leaves, so very distinct. And then the flowers on the left there, they kind of sort of look like bloodroot, but they're not poppies. They're actually barberries. Japanese barberry, that terrible invasive plant that's in a lot of the forest preserves, is related to twin leaf in the Berberidaceae, the barberry family. So this is also closely related to mayapple and blue cohosh. And if you look at the twin leaf flowers again now, they do actually look a lot like a mayapple flower. So that's interesting that they're, well, that's why they're closely related. This is not an easy one to find. It's a conservative species. It's going to be in your higher quality areas. And the flowers are very fleeting. Like we joke that if you look at this flower the wrong way, the petals will fall off. So to get a nice full flower picture, you really have to work hard at it. Or if you haven't planted, some people haven't planted in their gardens, and then you just watch it every day and it's easy. But if you're going into the wild, you really have to time it right to see those. Now here's wild geranium, Geranium maculatum. Geranium is Greek for cranesbill, and the fruit pods that form are long and narrow, like a cranesbill, and they actually fold back when they open, and they throw the seeds away farther from the plant. So that's cool. Maculatum means spotted, but the leaves are often not spotted. So I'm not sure what's up with that, but we see maculatum on a lot of plants. The spotted Joe Pye weed, right, is Eutrochium maculatum, or poison hemlock, Conium maculatum. But let's move on. Wood betony is another one of my favorites. It's a in the Plantagenet ACE, formerly a figwort. This wood betony, by the way, much better name than lousewort, which is the other name for this, but it is a hemiparasite. A lot of the former figwort, that a lot of those are in the Plantagenet ACE now. They are hemiparasites, meaning they're green. They can photosynthesize, make their own food, but they also parasitize other plants. So wood betony is really a useful plant, particularly in prairie restorations, because it seems to attack the roots of some of the more aggressive species. So it helps with the equilibrium of your prairie recreation to sort of keep all the plants well behaved. So always put the wood betony in there. And then another annual parasitic plant is Castelligia coccinea, the scarlet painted cup. And I have not seen this very many places in Illinois. This is actually at my friend's like wildflower meadow, where he planted them from seed. But in northern Illinois, I've seen them in Lake County, and Rock Island County actually has the other rare Castelligia. Sometimes these are yellow, by the way, and it's the same species. They can have red or yellow flower parts, and the parts that are colorful here are mostly the bracts. So if you were to pull that bract down, you could find the flower above it. But most of what we're seeing in this picture that's really colorful are bracts and not actually the flower. So that's really interesting information. And then, of course, some common ones that everybody knows: Solomon seal and false Solomon seal. So this is what I call the real deal Solomon seal, Polygonatum biflorum. And you can see it's easy identified because the flowers and fruits hang below the plant along the stem. Whereas false Solomon seal, or Myanthemum racemosum, the flowers are terminal. They occur at the end of the plant, not along the stem. But you can often find them side by side and often without fruits or flowers, and I think they're still pretty easy to distinguish. In this picture here, these are both rooted in the ground, growing naturally like this, side by side. The one on the left is the real deal Solomon seal. You can see that I would say that the veins are equally conspicuous. The leaves are going to have a rubbery feel, and they're going to be glaucous underneath, which means a whitish, waxy coating. Versus false Solomon seal on the right side, you have 3 to 5 deeply impressed veins, and then more inconspicuous veins in between. And then the leaves are thick instead of rubbery, and they're not glaucous, they're green. So they're pretty easy, I think, to tell apart vegetatively, but they are very common plants in the woods, and they'll last all summer long. Now, one that doesn't grow up north, but we have a great abundance in southern Illinois, is dwarf larkspur. These are really purple. Sometimes the colors come out kind of like they're blue, but they're a purple wildflower. Sometimes they're white or even bicolored, like the picture here on the right, which makes them pretty. Another buttercup in the Ranunculaceae. Another good prairie plant we have, or high quality conservative species, is the yellow stargrass, Hypoxus hirsuta. I saw some blooming today. Seems to like various types of soil moisture, but it's in the Amaryllis family, Amaryllidaceae. So again, not a grass, it's a misnomer. It's an Amaryllis. But moving on to another beautiful wildflower, the bird's foot violet, Viola pedata. Of course, pedata for foot. And you can see the finely divided leaves under the flowers. So they kind of have a turkey foot, or, a little bird's foot, as the name says. They're not always this bicolored. Often they're just the light blue colored, but these were at Piney Creek Ravine in Randolph County. And they have these dark purple petals, upper petals, and then the light blue below. So that makes them very striking. Of course, the bird's foot violet is the host plant for the fritillary, the regal fritillary. So it's a good one to have. Now here's Robbins plantain, Erigeron poecellus. Poecellus means showy. This is the conservative Erigeron. Erigeron are the daisy fleabanes, which are native but quite weedy. But this is a more conservative option. It has a larger flower head than the daisy fleabane, which is Erigeron philadelphicus, that blooms at the same time. The other daisy fleabanes are in the summer. The spring ones here, it has a much larger head and it's very hairy and it doesn't have clasping leaves. So those are a few differences for that. And then another truly ephemeral plant are the wild leeks, and these are also called ramps. So this is Allium trichocum. We have a similar narrow-leaved wild leek called Allium burdickii. They used to be varieties, now they're species. But in any event, they often grow just like this, just covering the hillside or mesic woodlands. But the leaves wither away by June. And then later the flowers appear. The flowers appear without any leaves present. So they're kind of weird. You just see these little stalks coming out of the ground with these white flowers. And you think, where are the leaves? So the leaves are long gone. And then when they go to fruit, they're distinct as well, as you can see there in the photo, those little black beads. I took this picture yesterday because I didn't like any of my Amsonia photos, but this is one that actually I've been seeing more in landscaping as well. When I used to go to the Morton Arboretum regularly, I would see they use this a lot in their plantings. So it's another good one to have on your radar. The blue star, Amsonia tabernaemontana. And this is a dogbane. It's in the dogbane family, the Apocynaceae. Well, in any event, it's I like to call it the alternate leaf dogbane because most dogbanes are opposite leaves. These have alternate, but it does have milky sap. So that's a key to identification if they're not blooming. If they're blooming with those blue 5-petaled flowers, there's not much you would mistake with it. And it is a wonderful plant.
Chris, is this one in northern Illinois?
Well, like I said, I've seen it planted and it is native in Illinois, but I don't know if it grows in the wild in northern Illinois. So moving on, have you ever seen anything like this? This whole hillside is solid green violet, Hypanthus concolor. It's got a new name. I struggle like everybody else to keep up with some of the new names that are changing, but a lot of us learned it as Hypanthus concolor. I had another photo with it. I reordered some. I got it out of order, but it's got these little cream colored flowers that are along the stem. And I like to say people smarter than me determined that it has floral structures similar to the violet, so it's in the violet family. That's why they call it green violet. Now, one that does occur statewide, although very rare, it does occur in Cook County, is the wild columbo, much more common in the southern part of the state, Frezera caroliniensis. You will see a scene like this where a hillside is just covered in these, they're glabrous, which means not hairy, big green basil leaves, and they'll be like that all summer long. But when it is because this is a monocarpic species. Monocarpic means they bloom once and then they die. So they occur at like these basil leaves for years and years, decades, before that they bolt and bloom. And when they bolt, they can reach heights of 6, 7, 8 feet tall and have this big candelabra inflorescence. It makes a lot of seeds, and it should, because that plant's going to die and it wants to reproduce and have the population persist. Again, Don Kurz, I mentioned at the beginning with the Illinois Wildflowers book, he said he couldn't find anything in the literature about how long it took for this wildflower to bloom from when it's a seed germinated. So he planted some in his woodland at his home, and it took 25 years for the plant to grow before it finally bloomed. And he wrote an article for the Harbinger a few years back. It's in the gentian family. So that's kind of neat, little gentian. They have really cool looking flowers. So that's just a super cool plant, the wild columbo. Corydalis probably should have been earlier with the dicentras, because it's similar, it's related to Dutchman's breeches and squirrel corn. And there's a few different species. They're yellow, so they're easy to tell apart, but they have that same frilly foliage, Corydalis or Corydalis. But let's go back to mustards. Here's a couple more. Spring cress, Cardamine bulbosa is on the left, and Douglasii is on the right. Douglasii is really only in the northern part of the state. It's called purple rocket, and it has hairy stems and usually a purplish hue to the petals, where the spring cress is statewide and it's whiter petals. Spring cress is on the left, Douglasii is on the right. I'm not sure if I misspoke, so let me clarify there. But the spring cress on the left, that is a glabrous stem, not hairy. So they're easy to be distinguished, both mustards. Now the anemones, we joke and say with frond, if you see anemones with ferns, you say with fronds like these, who needs anemones? This is the true rue anemone, Thalictrum thalictroides. One of the most ridiculous names for a plant there is, because oides means similar to. So it's the thalictrum that's similar to thalictrum. Doesn't make a lot of sense if you ask me, but it is a conservative species. You can see a nice number of plants in the photo. Typically, flowers have more than 5 petals, and they have a whorl of 6 leaves underneath the inflorescence. So we can contrast that. Oh, and I saw here's a cool double ringed extra petals on this particular individual. But we can contrast those with the leaves on the false rue anemone, Anemone biternatum. Biternatum means twice in groups of 3. And it's referring to the leaves. If you look at a leaf here, this is a whole leaf. There are 3 leaflets that are further divided into 3 segments. So I don't think false rue anemone looks very much like rue anemone. And I wonder if we just gave it a different common name, would people still confuse them? This species typically has 5 white petals, and it grows in big, dense patches. It's a colonial species, big colonies. So just easily distinguished, I think, from the true rue, but they are both buttercups in the Ranunculaceae. And one of my favorite ones, definitely a very conservative plant, is blue cohosh, Calophyllum thalictroides. So I put this in there so you can see thalictroides again. This one is actually, the leaves do resemble a thalictrum, so it's a good name for this plant. But this is related to barberry again, the Mayapples. This is in the Berberidaceae, and it's in cohosh. Sort of brings up the thought of black cohosh, which is a buttercup, totally unrelated. So I don't know why they call it blue cohosh. The fruits are blue, so that's good. But the cohosh part, don't be confused. That's black cohosh is totally different. But it is a good conservative species. Then one that everybody knows that grows everywhere is the Mertensia virginica, the Virginia bluebells. We usually see, floodplain areas, typically along creeks and terraces, big expanses of bluebells. And this is a borage, the Boraginaceae. The petals are united into a tube, and they have a little bell shape. They start out pink, they turn blue. Sometimes you find white populations too. So that's a really colorful one that everybody knows. And then I want to mention, we do have an early meadow rue, Thalictrum dioicum. Those leaves to me don't look so rue-ish. So I put in this next picture. This is a later flowering thalictrum, which is also a rue, meadow rue, and you can see the leaves, that shape. That's the rue shape, where they have 3 little lobes on them. So that's why I have all these plants with rue this and rue that in the name. But this one has dioicum, means dioecious, which is separate male and female plants. So on the left we have a male plant, because those are male sex organs, the stamens. And then on the right side, we have the stigmas and styles for the female plant. So you might look at this and think, how can this be the same species? These are totally 2 different looking, structures, but one's female, one's male. Moving on here, we have a couple trout lilies. Yellow trout lily, Erythronium americanum, seeing the picture here, versus white trout lily, Erythronium albidum. So what's bizarre about this in Illinois is that in the northern part of the state, the white trout lilies are much more common. They're just widespread, and you have to work a little harder to find the yellow ones. I wouldn't say they're rare. I would say they're uncommon, and they're just not nearly as common as the whites. And in Southern Illinois, the opposite is true. Most always see the yellow, and the whites are only in a few different places. So that's really cool. This is a plant that, like many other spring ephemerals, when they're reproductively immature, meaning they won't flower, they're too young, they're juveniles, there's just a single leaf produced, and they're photosynthesizing and waiting to grow. These spring ephemerals can take 7 to 10 years to store enough energy in the roots to flower. It takes a lot of energy to reproduce, so they need to store, and they're only photosynthesizing for a few weeks a year. So they're doing this over and over and over, storing the sugars in their roots until they have enough to flower. And when they do flower, they produce 2 leaves, and then the wildflower in the middle. So golden seal does that, and mayapple does that, and so does the trout lilies. But there's a third trout lily in Illinois. And Illinois is the only state east of the Mississippi River that has this, the prairie trout lily, Erythronium mesocorium. Excuse me. And this, it was formerly endangered in Illinois, and actually Bill McLean studied it, and when he was with DNR, and he found so many of it, they delisted it, but it's not doing well again, and there's talk about maybe listing it again. I had never seen this before. I've been waiting 12 years ever since I heard about this plant to go see it, and 2 or 3 weeks ago I went up to Carlinville, Illinois, which is in Montgomery County, south of Springfield, and to the Denby Prairie, where was one place where they're hanging on, and was able to see the prairie trout lily. So there's a number of differences. The leaves are conduplicate, which means they're folded, as you can see in the photo. The petals at maturity, they only spread, they don't reflex all the way, like a Turk's cap kind of looking thing. When they go to fruit, when the fruits are mature, they actually fall to the ground, where the white trout lily, they stay erect. And there's not a lot of, it's not a rhizomatous species. It doesn't have a lot of those single leaf stems growing nearby. And it's only in a handful of counties, really, in west central Illinois, as far as Illinois is concerned, and it's mostly farther west. So that's a really cool one. But moving on, here's wild ginger, another early bloomer. This, of course, is not related to the culinary ginger at all in any way. This is in the birthwort family, the Aristolochiaceae. And it has flowers that are produced at the base of the plant. So most wildflowers are advertising their flowers up high, saying, pollinators, I'm colorful, come visit me, spread pollen to reproduction. But these are also attracting carrion feeders. Often the maroon colored flowers are attracting flies and beetles and things that are attracted to rotting meat. But also having the wildflower down at the base of the plant in the springtime, the leaves in the ground are very insulating. And so they're keeping the area warmer. So during cold spring days or cool spring nights, the flies and beetles and things are actually seeking refuge in the little urn-shaped flower, where it's a little bit warmer. It can hide out in there and then pollinate the plant in the process. So that's really cool. I always joke and say, if somebody says, hey, did you see the wild ginger there? You go, I saw them. Heck yeah, I saw them. They're right over there. All right, moving on. Here's moving on here, golden seal. This is a plant that is rare everywhere, it seems, except Southern Illinois. I don't know what the story is. It's rare out east. It's an S3. So anytime, or G3, I guess, globally ranked. But in Southern Illinois, there's lots of it, and it's got these cool wildflowers. Again, this is one that single leaf will not flower. When it flowers, it'll produce 2 leaves, as you can see in the picture, and the flowers are all stamens. There's no petals. There's styles, pistil in the middle, and the white parts are the stamens, the anther and the filament. And again, another buttercup in the Ranunculaceae, the golden seal. Then this is also a harbinger for some people, it seems. It's one of the earliest prairie plants to bloom, the hoary puccoon, Lithospermum canescens. I was on a limestone glade today, saw some blooming. This is one of my favorite plants. Aldo Leopold in Salmon County Almanac said the puccoons only converse with the dead because they occur in these cemetery prairies that have been set aside and are pristine. But it also grows in other high-quality prairies and limestone glades and various habitat across the state. So a really neat one. And with all this talk about buttercups, here's an actual buttercup, the ranunculus. This is a common wetland one, Ranunculus septentrionalis, called the swamp buttercup. There are 29 species of buttercup in Illinois, so a lot. But let's keep moving. This is false mermaid weed, another just northern Illinois spring ephemeral, a true spring ephemeral. It just has a tiny little flower. It's not very showy, but all this lime green in the forest floor here is the false mermaid weed, Flerkia proserpinicoides. And that means similar to Proserpinaca, which is mermaid weed. So this is the false mermaid weed. Funny thing is that I don't think that they look very similar to each other, but that's what they're called. But this is a conservative species in woodlands. You can see the little white flower there. They typically have 3 petals. This is a confused individual. We say there's always a rebel in the group, but that is a good plant to have. And then the bellworts. So for a long time in Illinois, there were just 2 bellwort species known, grandiflora, the large bellwort on the left, and sescilifolia, the sessile bellwort on the right. So on the left, Uvularia grandiflora, the stalk of the flower passes through the leaf. So you can see the leaf wraps all the way around the stalk. On the sessile bellwort, it doesn't. The flowers are produced in the axils, and the leaves are actually sessile, meaning no stalked, but they're not perfoliate. They don't have the stem going through the leaf. And they're a little smaller flower and a little bit lighter cream color. Well, last year, a friend of mine posted this picture to iNaturalist, and somebody else identified it as the Florida bellwort. And you can see the flowers are larger than the sessile. They have sessile leaves. So this was mistaken for the sessile leaf bellwort for a long time. It grows at Heron Pond Nature Preserve in Johnson County. There is a bract on the flower stalk that distinguishes it from the others, but the flowers are also larger, and the plant itself is larger. So look at the distribution there. It's known in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, and it's not really very common in those states. And then now all the way up in Johnson County, Illinois. And these probably didn't just show up some way recently. The where they're growing, I bet they were overlooked for years. They're growing side by side with the sessile bellwort, so they were probably overlooked, and no one looked into it. And last year was found as a new addition to the state's flora. Super cool. Let's move on. French's shooting star. There are three shooting stars in Illinois. The jeweled shooting stars in the Northwest used to be listed also, but it was taken off. Then we have the common shooting star in every county in Illinois. And then just in southern Illinois, in the greater Shawnee Hills, is the French's shooting star, Primula Frenchii. And it only grows along the bases of sandstone cliffs and under sandstone overhangs. The leaves are more lime green, and they have a petiole to them. But they're very restricted in habitat. But the southern Illinois is the mother lode of this species. It was actually for a long time only thought to occur in southern Illinois, but it was found in Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, even Alabama, and Arkansas too, I think. So a few other states. Jack in the Pulpit's really cool. Everybody knows this one. It's related to skunk cabbage and the arum family. You can see Jack there in the middle of the pulpit, the spathe. They do have 3 leaves, hence triphyllum means 3 leaf. So that's neat. And it's related to green dragon, Erythema dracontium. Totally different shaped leaf and really different flowers, but in the same genus. They have the spathe and the spadix. It's a really wild looking flower. But you find these are super common woodland plants. Find them together. They're really not hard to find. Fernleaf Acelia, I think, is really just in southern Illinois, so take a good look at it. It's the waterleaf family, but I'm just going to keep on moving because I have more slides to show. This is Jacob's Ladder, another great one that occurs statewide. A lot of people know. It's got the ladder sort of shaped leaves that are paired. It is in the phlox family. It's actually the Polemoniaceae, but they call it the phlox family, which is interesting. But another beautiful blue wildflower, just like this blue wildflower is our common phlox, Phlox divaricata. There's a number of different phloxes, and this is probably the most common one. We also have cleft phlox, Phlox bifida. I always like to find what we call the FGBs, the full glorious blooms, the mass blooms of things, like the cleft phlox here. This is at LaRue Pine Hills. In Giant City State Park, we get a lot of blue-eyed Marys, but this also statewide, Collinsia verna for spring. This is an annual. I think they call it a winter annual, which means it germinates in the winter, and then it's ready for springtime to grow. Just always grows in huge colonies. It seems just lots and lots of it. Same with sometimes with the wild hyacinth. It's really wonderful to find sites that have mass blooms of this beautiful wildflower. This is at Cave Creek Glade, which is down where I'm at, but I've seen it at Wolf Road Prairie. You know, it's around the state. Nachusa grasslands, I'm sure it's got it. Violet wood sorrel, another cute little purple flower. early bloomer. It's got little clover-like leaves that often fold up, like you can see in the picture there. And then some of our true water leaf. The Virginia water leaf is the one that really has the modeling that shows the water spots. But we have other water leaf species. Often it's the basal leaves, the lowest leaves, the first leaves that emerge are often mottled, but then the mature leaves are just green, like in this picture. This is Hydrophyllum apiculatum. You can see in this picture here, in between the sepals is a little appendage. If I can put on my pointer here, right here, this little piece is in between the green sepals, and it's pointing straight down away from the flower. So that's the appendage. That's easy identification for this species. But it doesn't really look that similar to this one, the Virginia waterleaf, Hydrophyllum virginianum, which is the most common one in the northern part of the state. I should really put a better photo in so you can see more of the mottled leaves, but they're much more divided than the other one. And the stamens, they stick way out past the edge of the petals. We have mayapple, another one that these are actually clones. So they form big patches because they're genetically identical. One is single leaf. Typically, I have seen single leaves with flowers, but typically one stem, one leaf, they're immature and they won't flower, and then they'll grow two leaves, and at the branch of the leaves is where the flowers are produced. And then the fruit is the mayapple there that kind of hangs down, and it's eaten by a lot of things like box turtles and mammals and stuff. They distribute the seeds that way. This is a toxic plant. Everything but the ripe fruit is toxic to humans, but it is a neat wildflower. And here's a picture, sort of one in stature, where you can see the flowers are hidden underneath the leaves. And then I took this picture today because I thought it was interesting. They're often browsed. So look at these. There's no leaves. They got eaten, clipped off there by deer. And that happens. We go, oh dear. I also want to mention some other violets. So not all violets are violet. Here's a non-violet violet. The cream violet, Viola striata, is on the left, and then yellow violet, Viola pubescens, on the right. And then here's the picture of the green violet I was looking for earlier. You can see the little cream white flowers that are along the stem for that one. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the trilliums in Illinois. I don't have them all, but I have a lot of them. And then I'm going to end with shrubs that are pretty, okay? So we're getting towards the end here. 10 more minutes. This is snow trillium. We have 9 trilliums in Illinois in the book, and this is the earliest blooming one. It often too can warm up the snow so that the plant and flowers can emerge if there's snow still on the ground, which often happens in the spring. You get those unexpected snowstorms. I think you guys just had one up there, but this is actually a very small little dainty wildflower. I like to go see it at White Pine State Park, but it is throughout the northern half of Illinois. Cute little one. Another trillium is the Trillium grandiflorum, called the Great White Trillium. We don't get this one down south, but it often grows in large colonies, large patches. Deer do like to eat trillium. I actually have a picture somewhere from a site in Lake County that had a deer fence exclosure, and inside of the fence it was solid Trillium grandiflorum, and outside the fence very scattered individuals because the deer are eating them all. We do have a rare one here. It's only really on the western side of the state. Trillium erectum, the ill-scented trillium. Remember, the maroon flowers often have a foul odor to attract carrion feeders, hence the name ill-scented trillium, but other people call it red trillium. But it's a pretty one. Similar to the white trillium, Trillium flexipes. As you can see here, it has very large leaves, so that distinguishes it from the other white trillium we had earlier. Probably the most common trillium across the state is purple trillium. I think it's in every single county in Illinois, Trillium recurvatum. And I want to point you to right here. This structure here is the sepal. And the sepal is pointing downwards or recurved, hence the name recurvatum. So that's very useful because a lot of trilliums can look similar. So this super common trillium, you want to make sure for correct identification that the sepal here is pointing down. But it typically has maroon petals and maroon stamens. But sometimes you can find ones like this. I actually took this picture this year as well. and the Trail of Tears State Forest, ones that have yellow petals but still purple stamens, is Forma luteum. So, we have species, and then lesser taxon are subspecies or varieties or forms. So this is just a form with yellow petals, but there's another form. This is the rarest of them. This is the one you really want to seek out. The Shays Trillium. Trillium recurvatum Forma Shayi with yellow petals and yellow stamens. But then I see also the sepals pointing straight down, recurved. So that's how we know it's the recurvatum. But another one that's rarer in the state, I'm actually tracking this for plants of concern, is the sessile trillium, Trillium sessile. And the sessile actually refers to the flowers. The flowers are not on a stalk. On some of the earlier ones we saw, the flowers were stalked, so they're raised above the leaves. But these sit right on top of the leaves, which technically aren't leaves, and they're bracts again. But again, people smarter than me are making these determinations. You can see it has a maroon flower. It has spreading sepals, right? They're not recurved. They're not pointing down. They're spreading. So that's how you can identify the sessile trillium there with bloodroot in the photo. And I had to put, and then I found a yellow variety of that. So apparently there's Forma viridiflorum is the yellow petaled version of Trillium sessile. So that was a really cool one to find. But this one here is really rare. This is Trillium viridi, is the green trillium. This is only in a couple counties in Illinois. I know 6 or 7 locations. Actually flowering now. And you can see it has spreading sepals as well. And the petals are more of a green, yellow, even maroon parts to them. So if it wasn't for Missouri, this would be federally threatened because there's not a lot of it in Illinois. But Missouri is the only other state that has this, and they have a lot of it there. But in Illinois, it's rare. I guess I had a few more wildflowers. Wild columbine, I'll skip by. That's a beautiful one. Another buttercup. Bishop's cap, another cool one. This is a saxifrage with the cute little snowflake-looking flowers. We have doll's eyes. Another ranunculus, the buttercup. This is Actea pachypeda. The fruit you can see has the little black spots on the white berries, looking like a doll's eye. Fire pink, Silene virginica, beautiful red-colored one. This might be more of an early summer one. Sinandra only occurs in Jackson County. The state endangered one is a mint. This is a rare plant really across its range. So it's really cool that we have this in Illinois, and it's only in Jackson County, but we did get a Union County record a couple years ago. And it often grows with this much more common, but also beautiful wildflower, the pink valerian, Valeriana passiflora. Stunner there. Passiflora means few flowered, which there's quite a few flowers, I would say, but the other valerianas have lots of flowers. So that's why it gets the name. And then the last herb I want to show here, of course, is this stunningly beautiful yellow lady slipper orchid. I saw some yesterday in bloom, Jackson County. I just can never get enough of these. I love this plant. And I know of a number of locations for it in the state. So let's look at some shrubs. I want to end here by saying that, these are not ephemeral in the sense that the shrubs are, they're persistent all year round, but they have flowers that bloom in the spring. And often one of the problems with the spring flowers in forest preserves can be that they're invaded by honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle, and buckthorn. And so those are often cleared. Sometimes landowners want to know what shrubs they can plant in place of those invaders. And here are my recommendations. So serviceberry is one, Amelanchier arborea, blooms really early, loved by pollinators. The serviceberries, the fruit, loved by birds and mammals and humans. So it's a rose in the rose family. Of course, we also have red buds. Red buds are peas, so they produce a legume. They have these pea-shaped flowers that are really beautiful and pink. Everybody's seen red buds. Sometimes they're white. Excuse me. I've seen white ones planted around. Excuse me, gosh. And then we have pawpaw, Asimina triloba. It's got the tasty fruit there, the pawpaw fruits that are produced later in the year. Of course, another one attracting carrion. Carrion feeders is the maroon flowers on the pawpaw. We have a couple buckeyes. This is the Ohio buckeye with the cream colored flowers. I'm standing here with the national Yes, not just the state, the national champion Ohio Buckeye in Oak Brook, Illinois, DuPage County. A wonderfully large tree. This will be the flowers that are associated with it. But in Southern Illinois, we actually have the red Buckeyes. And the red Buckeyes are pretty rare. I'm actually was investigating all the red Buckeye populations I could find this last week and yesterday to see really how rare they are. And what's interesting is you can actually get a hybrid in between the Ohio and the red. It'll produce these pinkish yellow flowers. That's Aeschylus bushii, the hybrid between the yellow and the red. So that's neat. And I found some of those. Bladdernut is another early blooming one, another good shrub. It likes mesic areas, so where it's moist along creeks and things. It produces a fruit that's looks like a lantern. It's a big capsule, and when the seeds detach, it makes a little rattle box. So that's fun. Another one that I love telling people to plant if they don't know what to put for shrubs in their yard are viburnums. So in Northern Illinois, probably a good one would be Viburnum lintago, the nannyberry. Where I'm at, we have more of the rusty black haw, Viburnum refugulum. There's the regular black haw, Viburnum prunifolium. There's Viburnum dentatum, arrowwood. So there's a number of viburnums. They're all good. And two more slides here I want to show you. Silver bells. Again, this is an endangered plant in Illinois. It only grows along the Ohio River in Massac and Pulaski counties, but it's planted at the Morton Arboretum and it's available in nursery trade. So you could incorporate this in your home landscape. It has these beautiful bell-shaped, flowers that hang down from the tree. It's a small tree. It doesn't get very big. So it'll be a little shrub, for a while, and you'll be able to see the blooms and enjoy it. And then finally here, wild azalea. So in the southwestern corner of the state, we get a couple different species of wild azalea, the rhododendrons. This is Rhododendron pernophyllum, and it has a very pleasantly fragrant scent to it. We joke and say that you could smell the wild azalea before you see it because it's like cotton candy in the air. And I think that this actually is pretty rare. I visited all the locations that I know of. There's less than 10. I think it should be state threatened, so I may propose that. But it is a beautiful wildflower of Illinois. So there you go. There's the information that you can believe because you can trust me. I'm a botanist. So I want to make sure you're aware of my website, illinoisbotanizer.com. And of course, you're welcome to email me anytime if you want to at botanizer@gmail.com. So thanks again for the invitation to speak to your group. I enjoyed it. And glad we got this recording that we'll be able to share with the rest of your members. So I'd be happy to answer any questions now if there are any.
So if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask Chris your question. And again, I will apologize with the difficulty in getting the Zoom link to work tonight. We don't know why it wasn't working. So are there any questions?
Chris, this is Janet. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I follow the Native Habitat Project on TikTok. Anyhow, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but he's down in Alabama. And he's a
know that guy.
Crazy promoter of native plants, and so many of them are similar to up here. But just recently, he was questioning why bloodroot leaves are so diverse. Like on one plant, sometimes they're quite indented and some are smooth. And one person thought it could have been something to do with nutrition or where the plant is growing that might determine why leaves are so different looking?
Yeah, I have no idea. That's an interesting question.
Uh-huh.
I do notice the variability, but I really don't even have a guess of why that may be. I chalk it up to prerogative.
Yeah, because so many other plants, obviously their leaves look identical or pretty identical, but a bloodroot is quite unusual.
Definitely.
I'm going to do some research and figure it out. I'll share it if I find out.
Sounds good.
Any other questions? So I hope everybody, now you're all inspired to get your orders in for the plant sale. The deadline is coming up soon. I think next week.
A week from tomorrow. Yes, April
Then,
28th.
There will be quite a few plants that you cannot pre-order that will be available on the day of the sale. And if you are a Wild Ones member, you get first pick if you come on Thursday evening.
And if you aren't a Wild Ones member and you want to join, you can still come on Thursday.
Yes, we will take your money. So for all of those who got on the Zoom late, next month, for our May meeting, we will be starting at 6:30 instead of 7. And the reason is we're going to be meeting at the Cherry Valley Library, but we'll also be on Zoom. And so we have to be out of there by 8 o'clock, so we need to get started a little earlier. And we'll probably be, if that works out, we'll be meeting there in June also. And then July will be our member picnic. And you'll get more information about that. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for patiently or being patient with us on our Zoom link, and we'll figure out what went wrong with that.